I saved a baby's life and her mother dragged me to court for reckless rescue, and she demanded I pay 500,000 for her suffering. But later, karma hit her when the judge sees my case. Sup Reddit. So I, 25 male, caught a falling baby, saved its life, got sued for $500,000, and somehow ended up being the bad guy. Yeah, you read that right. I literally risked my life to stop a kid from becoming sidewalk pizza, and the mother's response was to drag me to court for reckless rescue. But here's where it gets good, because karma hit her hard. Let me break this down for you, because this whole thing still feels like a fever dream. I'm Jason, 25 male, and I work as an HVAC technician in Austin, Texas. Nothing fancy, but I make decent money, around $62,000 a year after overtime. I've been doing this for about 4 years now, ever since I finished trade school. I'm single, live alone in a one-bedroom apartment that costs me $1,340 a month, and I generally keep to myself. I'm not the hero type. I don't go looking for trouble. I mind my business, fix people's air conditioners, and go home. That's it. My day-to-day is pretty straightforward. I wake up at 6 a.m., grab coffee from the shop downstairs. They know my order. Medium roast with a splash of cream, $3.75 every morning, and I'm on the road by 6:45. Most days I've got 4 to 6 service calls scheduled. Residential units mostly, though occasionally I'll get a commercial job that pays better. I keep a detailed log of every job: address, time in, time out, work performed, parts used, payment received. It's just how I operate. Everything documented, everything organized. That habit would end up saving me later, but I didn't know that yet. My apartment is nothing special. 700 square feet, one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen the size of a closet. I've got a couch I bought off Facebook Marketplace for $180, a TV I got on Black Friday 3 years ago for $340, and a bed frame from Target that cost me $220. My most expensive possession is my tool set, about $4,800 worth of equipment that I've accumulated over the years. I take care of my stuff. Everything has its place. I've got about $8,300 in savings, which took me 2 years to build up. I put away $350 every month, sometimes more if I get overtime. I drive a 2015 Ford Transit van with 140,000 miles on it that I bought used for $18,500. It's paid off, which is one less thing to worry about. My credit score is 740, which I'm proud of considering I started from nothing after trade school. I don't have debt. I don't buy things I can't afford. I live below my means and I sleep fine at night. The point is, I'm not rich. I'm not well connected. I'm just a regular guy trying to make it work in a city where rent goes up every year and everything costs more than it should. But apparently, one moment of basic human decency was enough to completely screw up my life for 8 months. Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon in July around 4:47 p.m. I just finished a service call at an apartment complex downtown, replaced a compressor, collected my $280 service fee, and was walking back to my van. It was one of those brutal Texas summer days where the heat hits you like a wall the second you step outside. I'm talking 104 degrees, the kind of weather where your shirt sticks to your back within 30 seconds. I'm cutting through this apartment complex parking lot, texting my buddy Kyle about meeting up later for dinner, when I hear this woman screaming. Not like a startled scream, a full-on blood-curdling terror scream. I look up, and I see it. A baby. A literal baby, maybe 18 months old, had somehow squeezed through the railings of a fifth-floor balcony and was dangling by one arm. The mom, I'll call her Nicole because that's her name, was reaching through the bars, trying to grab the kid, but she couldn't get a grip. The baby's fingers were slipping. I didn't think. I just moved. I dropped my phone, later found out the screen cracked, $140 to replace, and sprinted across the parking lot. My work boots weren't exactly designed for running, but adrenaline has a way of making you forget about things like footwear. I positioned myself directly under the balcony, arms up, trying to calculate where the baby would land. I could hear Nicole screaming, "Help! Somebody help! Oh my God, please!" Other people were starting to notice, pulling out their phones, but nobody else was moving. They were all just standing there, recording or staring. Here's where it gets interesting. I'm not a small guy. I'm 6 feet 2 inches, about 210 pounds, and I've got decent reflexes from playing baseball in high school. But catching a falling object from 5 stories up, that's not something you train for. I had maybe 3 seconds to calculate the trajectory, position my arms, and brace for impact. 3 seconds feels like nothing until you're living it. In those 3 seconds, my brain went through every possible scenario. What if I miss? What if I catch him but drop him? What if the impact kills us both? What if I'm making everything worse? But there wasn't time for what ifs. The baby fell. I caught him. Sort of. The thing is, when you catch a 24-pound object falling from 50 feet in the air, the physics don't care about your good intentions. The impact was like getting hit with a sack of concrete. My arms absorbed most of it, but the force was so intense that I couldn't keep my grip stable. The baby twisted in my arms, and I heard this sickening crack. Not loud, but distinct enough that my stomach dropped immediately. I went down hard, landing on my back with the baby on top of me. My head smacked against the asphalt, and for a second everything went white. I tasted blood. My shoulder felt like it had been ripped out of its socket. But the baby was crying, which meant he was alive, which meant I'd done what I was supposed to do. I didn't let go. I held onto that kid like my life depended on it, even though every nerve in my body was screaming at me to just lie there and pass out. People started rushing over. Someone called 911. Nicole came running down from her apartment, absolutely hysterical. My baby? Oh my God, my baby! She grabbed him out of my arms, and I finally let myself collapse. I remember lying there on the hot asphalt, staring up at the sky, thinking, well, at least the kid's okay. Turns out he wasn't. The paramedics showed up about 6 minutes later. They checked me out first. Mild concussion, dislocated shoulder, severe bruising on my back and arms, and a couple of cracked ribs. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to put me out of commission for work. Then they checked the baby. Multiple fractures. Both arms. Both legs. The doctor at the hospital later explained it to me. When I caught him, the sudden deceleration caused his bones, which were still soft and developing, to fracture under the force. It wasn't my fault exactly, but it also wasn't not my fault. The alternative, obviously, was the baby hitting the pavement at terminal velocity and dying instantly, but that nuance didn't seem to matter to Nicole. I spent that night in the hospital. Kyle came to pick me up the next morning, helped me get my van from the apartment complex, and drove me home. My shoulder was in a sling. My head felt like it had been split open, and I couldn't work for at least 3 weeks. I'd already called my boss to explain the situation, and he was cool about it. Told me to take all the time I needed, that my job would be waiting for me. My boss, Frank, is one of those old-school guys who's been in the business for 30 years. He runs a small operation, just 5 technicians including me, and he treats us right. When I called him from the hospital, his exact words were, "You did good, kid. Don't worry about work. Focus on healing. No questions about coverage, no guilt trips, just support." I appreciated that more than I could say. Those first few days after the incident were rough. I couldn't lift anything with my right arm. Getting dressed took 20 minutes. Showering was a nightmare. I had to sleep sitting up because lying flat made my ribs scream. My pain medication cost me $85 out of pocket, and I was going through it faster than I wanted to admit. But the physical pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. No call from Nicole, no text, no card, nothing. I kept checking my phone, thinking maybe she'd reach out to see how I was doing. Maybe she'd want to say thank you or at least acknowledge that I'd gotten hurt saving her kid. But days went by, then a week, then 10 days, and nothing. Radio silence. I figured that was the end of it. I'd done a good thing, gotten banged up in the process, but the kid was alive. That's all that mattered, right? Wrong. About 10 days later, I got served. I was sitting on my couch, watching some mindless TV and eating microwaved mac and cheese, when there was a knock on my door. I opened it, and this guy in a cheap suit handed me a manila envelope. "Jason Miller, you've been served." I just stood there, staring at the envelope like it was a live grenade. I'd never been sued before. Never even been in a courtroom except for a speeding ticket when I was 19. I opened it right there in the doorway, and my brain just short-circuited. Nicole Martinez was suing me for $500,000. Let me say that again. $500,000. The claim was negligent and reckless rescue resulting in severe bodily harm. Her lawyer argued that I should have assessed the situation more carefully and employed proper safety measures before attempting the catch, that I failed to exercise reasonable care, and that my actions directly caused significant injuries requiring extensive medical treatment and long-term rehabilitation. I read the whole thing twice, then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating from the concussion. The thing is, I wasn't rich. I wasn't even comfortable. I had about $8,300 in savings, a beat-up 2015 Ford Transit van with 140,000 miles on it, and a decent credit score. I didn't have $500,000. I didn't have $50,000. I barely had enough to cover my rent for the next 6 months if I couldn't work. The lawsuit included itemized damages, $87,342 in medical expenses, $42,000 for pain and suffering, $38,000 for emotional distress, $150,000 for diminished quality of life, and another $182,658 for future medical care and therapy. The numbers were so specific it almost seemed legitimate, until you remembered that I was being sued for preventing a baby from dying. I called Kyle. Kyle's been my best friend since sophomore year of high school. He's 26, works as a paralegal at a mid-sized law firm downtown, and he's one of those guys who's just effortlessly competent at everything. He's got his life together in a way that makes me feel like I'm constantly playing catch-up, but he's never condescending about it. When I told him what happened, he was at my apartment within 20 minutes. "Let me see the paperwork," he said, not even bothering with small talk. I handed him the lawsuit. He read through it, his expression getting darker with every page. When he finished, he set it down on my coffee table and just stared at it for a second. "This is insane," he said finally. "You saved that kid's life. Apparently that doesn't matter." "No, it should matter. It will matter." He pulled out his phone and started typing. "I'm going to talk to one of the attorneys at my firm. We handle some civil cases. I'll see if anyone's willing to take this pro bono, or at least give you a consultation." "Kyle, I can't afford—" "I know. That's why I said pro bono. Just let me make some calls, okay?" "Don't panic yet." Easy for him to say. I was already panicking. The lawsuit included a court date 6 weeks out. 6 weeks to figure out how to defend myself against a woman who was claiming I'd ruined her child's life by saving it. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Here's what really got me, though. There was no thank you. No acknowledgement that I'd risked my own safety to stop her kid from dying. No apology for the fact that her negligence, leaving a balcony door open and unsupervised, had caused this whole mess in the first place. Just a lawsuit. Just a $500,000 demand for compensation because her baby's bones broke when I caught him, instead of letting him splatter. Kyle left around midnight, promising he'd have answers by the end of the week. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, staring at my ceiling, replaying the whole thing in my head. The scream, the fall, the impact, the crack. Over and over. I started running the numbers in my head. If I lost this lawsuit, and I had no idea if I would or wouldn't, I'd be financially destroyed. They could garnish my wages for years. They could take my savings, my van, everything I'd worked for. I'd be starting over from zero, except worse than zero because I'd have a legal judgment hanging over me for the rest of my life. All because I caught a baby. By the end of the week, Kyle had come through. He connected me with an attorney named Richard Eng, a 50-something civil litigator with a reputation for taking on underdog cases. Richard agreed to represent me on a contingency basis, meaning he'd only get paid if we won or settled. We met at his office the following Monday. Richard's office was in an older building downtown, the kind with hardwood floors and tall windows. His office itself was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer with 30 years of experience. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves packed with legal texts, a massive oak desk, framed diplomas from UT Austin and Harvard Law, and a coffee maker that looked like it had been there since the 90s. Richard was exactly what you'd expect, too. Sharp suit, steel gray hair, reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, and a handshake that could crush walnuts. He sat me down, reviewed the lawsuit, and asked me to walk him through the entire incident step by step. I told him everything. The scream, the sprint, the catch, the hospital, the silence from Nicole afterward. He took notes the whole time, nodding occasionally but not interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This is a bad faith lawsuit," he said flatly, "and I'm going to enjoy destroying it." Bad faith? She's suing you for doing what any reasonable person would do in that situation. You didn't cause the child to fall. You didn't create the dangerous condition. You responded to an emergency with the tools and knowledge you had available, and you prevented a fatality. The injuries are unfortunate, but they're a direct result of the physics involved, not negligence on your part. So, I'm going to be okay? You're going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm going to countersue for emotional distress, lost wages, and legal fees. If this goes to trial, she's going to regret ever filing this. For the first time in 2 weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Here's what we're going to do, Richard continued. First, I'm going to file a motion to dismiss based on Good Samaritan laws. Texas has protections for people who provide emergency assistance. Second, I'm going to depose every witness who saw what happened. Third, I'm going to get expert testimony from a biomechanics specialist who can explain why the injuries were unavoidable. And fourth, I'm going to make sure the judge understands exactly what kind of person is bringing this lawsuit. What do you mean? Let's just say I'm going to do some homework on Miss Martinez. People who file lawsuits like this usually have a pattern. Turns out, Nicole had more problems than just a weak lawsuit. Richard did some digging. Nothing illegal, just public record searches and social media, and found a pattern. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to extract money from a situation. 3 years earlier, she'd sued a grocery store for a slip and fall, claiming she'd injured her back on a wet floor. The case settled for $12,000. A year before that, she'd filed a workers' comp claim for carpal tunnel syndrome after working at a call center for 8 months. That one paid out $7,500. She's a professional victim, Richard said during one of our meetings. She sees opportunities where other people see accidents. So what do? We let her bury herself. People like this always overplay their hand. He was right. Nicole's legal strategy was a disaster from the start. Her lawyer, a guy named Brett Hoffman, who looked fresh out of law school, kept filing motions that got denied. He tried to subpoena my medical records to prove that I was physically incapable of safely catching the baby, but the judge shot it down. He tried to introduce testimony from a biomechanics expert who would argue that I should have used my body differently, but the expert's credentials didn't hold up under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Richard was building our case methodically. He tracked down 4 witnesses who'd seen the whole thing, people who'd been in the parking lot, people who'd been on their balconies. All of them gave statements confirming the same thing. The baby was falling, I caught him, and I probably saved his life. One witness, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, even testified that she saw Nicole's balcony door wide open, with no safety gate or supervision before the incident. Richard also got the 911 call records. You could hear Nicole screaming in the background, but the operator's notes were what really mattered. Caller states infant fell from balcony. Bystander caught child. Child is breathing and conscious. No mention of negligence. No mention of recklessness. Just the facts. The deposition process was brutal. I had to sit in a conference room for 3 hours, while Brett Hoffman asked me the same questions 15 different ways, trying to get me to say something that would hurt my case. Richard coached me beforehand. Answer honestly. Don't volunteer extra information. Stay calm. Did you consider using a blanket to catch the child? No. There wasn't time. Did you consider calling for help before attempting the rescue? The child was falling. There wasn't time to call for help. Did you have any training in emergency rescue techniques? No. So you acted without proper training or preparation? I acted to prevent a child from dying. Brett tried to make me sound reckless, but every answer I gave just reinforced the same point. There was no time, no alternatives, no other option except to let the baby die. By the end of the deposition, even he looked frustrated. Richard, on the other hand, destroyed Nicole's deposition. He asked her about the previous lawsuits, the timeline of events, her supervision of the child. She contradicted herself multiple times, got defensive, and at one point actually said, "I'm the victim here," which Richard made sure to get in writing. The trial was set for early March, 8 months after the incident. I'd been back to work for 6 months by then, but the lawsuit had been hanging over my head the whole time. I couldn't sleep right. I couldn't focus. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it was another legal document or a demand for money. Kyle kept telling me to trust the process, but trusting the process is a lot easier when you're not the one being sued for saving a baby's life. I lost 12 pounds during those 8 stressful months. Not on purpose. I just couldn't eat. My appetite was gone. Food tasted like cardboard. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, thinking about worst-case scenarios. Frank noticed and kept checking in on me, making sure I was okay. "You did the right thing," he'd say. "Don't let them make you doubt that." But it's hard not to doubt yourself when you're being sued for $500,000. The day of the trial, I showed up at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. Richard met me outside, looking as calm as ever. Kyle came too, just for moral support. He'd used a vacation day to be there. "Remember," Richard said as we walked in, "stay calm. Answer the questions honestly. Don't get emotional. The facts are on our side." The courtroom was smaller than I expected. There was a judge's bench, a witness stand, a jury box, though this was a bench trial, meaning no jury, and 2 tables for the legal teams. Nicole was already there, sitting with Brett Hoffman. She didn't look at me. I still had faint bruises on my face from the fall. My shoulder ached every time I moved it wrong. I'd lost 3 weeks of wages, which came out to $3,576.92 after taxes. I'd spent $1,840 on medical bills that my insurance didn't cover. I'd paid another $230 for transportation to and from the hospital because Kyle couldn't take that much time off work, all because I tried to stop a baby from dying. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Winters, called the court to order. We're here today for Martinez versus Miller. Ms. Martinez, you're alleging that Mr. Miller's actions caused significant harm to your child. Mr. Miller, you're arguing that your actions were reasonable under the circumstances and that this lawsuit is without merit. Is that correct? Both lawyers confirmed. Let's begin. Brett Hoffman went first. He called Nicole to the stand. She looked different, polished. She was wearing a conservative navy blue dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like a concerned mother, not someone filing a $500,000 lawsuit against the guy who saved her kid. Brett walked her through the day of the incident. She described hearing a noise, turning around, seeing her baby on the balcony. She claimed she'd only looked away for a few seconds to grab a diaper from inside the apartment. She said she ran back out and saw the baby slipping through the bars. What went through your mind when you saw Mr. Miller catch your son? Brett asked. I was relieved at first, Nicole said, her voice shaking. But then I heard him cry. Not just a regular cry, a pain cry. And when the paramedics examined him, they told me both his arms and both his legs were broken. My baby was in casts for months. He had to go through physical therapy. He still has limited mobility in his left arm. And do you believe Mr. Miller could have done something differently to prevent those injuries? Yes. He could have, I don't know, positioned himself better, used a blanket, called for help instead of trying to be a hero. Richard didn't even object. He just wrote something down on his legal pad and waited. Brett continued. Ms. Martinez, can you describe the financial impact this has had on your family? The medical bills were over $87,000. Insurance covered most of it, but we still owe $14,200 out of pocket. I had to take unpaid leave from work to care for my son during his recovery, which cost me about $6,000 in lost wages. And there's the ongoing therapy, which is $120 per session twice a week. Thank you, Miss Martinez. No further questions. Judge Winters looked at Richard. Cross-examination? Yes, Your Honor. Richard stood up, adjusted his glasses, and walked toward the witness stand. He didn't look angry. He looked calm, almost bored. Ms. Martinez, you testified that you only looked away for a few seconds before your son reached the balcony. Is that correct? Yes. How old is your son now? 2.5. And at the time of the incident, he was approximately 18 months old? Yes. Can you explain to the court how an 18-month-old child managed to open a sliding glass door, walk across a balcony, and squeeze through railings designed to prevent exactly that scenario in just a few seconds? Nicole hesitated. I don't know. He's a fast crawler. He crawled across the balcony? I think so. But you just said you were only gone for a few seconds. Ms. Martinez, how long does it take to grab a diaper from inside an apartment? I don't know. 10 seconds? 15? And in those 10 to 15 seconds, your son crawled from wherever he was, opened a sliding glass door, crossed a balcony, and squeezed through the railings? Objection, Brett said. Argumentative. Overruled, Judge Winters said. Answer the question, Miss Martinez. I guess it took longer than I thought. So you weren't paying attention to your son for longer than a few seconds. I was inside for maybe a minute. A minute, okay. And during that minute, your son, an 18-month-old child, was left unsupervised on a 5th-floor balcony with no safety gate or barriers beyond the standard railings. I didn't think he could get through the bars, but he did. Yes. Richard paused, letting that sink in. Then he continued. Ms. Martinez, you testified that you've incurred significant financial hardship due to this incident. Specifically, you mentioned $14,200 in out-of-pocket medical expenses. Is that correct? Yes. And you're suing Mr. Miller for $500,000? Yes. Can you explain to the court why you believe Mr. Miller, who prevented your son from falling 50 feet onto concrete and dying, should pay you $500,000? Nicole's lawyer started to object, but Judge Winters waved him off. I want to hear the answer. Nicole looked at the judge, then at Richard, then back at the judge. Because my son was hurt. Because Mr. Miller didn't do it right. Didn't do it right, Richard repeated. Miss Martinez, are you trained in emergency rescue techniques? No. Have you ever caught a falling object from 5 stories up? No. Have you ever taken a physics class? In high school, but so you have no expertise in emergency response, no training in rescue operations, and no understanding of the forces involved in catching a falling child. Is that correct? I'm his mother. I know. Answer the question, please. Do you have any expertise in this area? No. Yet you're claiming that Mr. Miller, who had approximately 3 seconds to react, should have done something different. He broke my baby's bones. No, Ms. Martinez. Gravity broke your baby's bones. Mr. Miller prevented gravity from breaking your baby's skull. There's a difference. Brett Hoffman shot to his feet. Objection! Your Honor, this is sustained. Mr. Eng, rephrase. Richard nodded. Ms. Martinez, are you aware that the survival rate for a fall from 5 stories onto concrete is less than 10%? No. Are you aware that if Mr. Miller hadn't been there, your son would almost certainly be dead? Objection. Overruled. Answer the question, Ms. Martinez. Yes, I guess. You guess. Richard walked back to his table, picked up a document, and handed it to Nicole. This is the incident report filed by the responding paramedics. Can you read the highlighted section for the court? Nicole took the document, her hands shaking. Bystander intervention likely prevented fatality. Patient conscious and breathing upon arrival. Injuries consistent with impact force, but not life-threatening. Thank you. Richard took the document back. One more question, Miss Martinez. Did you ever thank Mr. Miller for saving your son's life? Silence. Miss Martinez? No. Did you call him? Send a card? Visit him in the hospital to see how he was doing after risking his life for your child? No. Did you do anything at all to acknowledge what he did? No. But you did file a lawsuit for $500,000. Objection. Withdrawn. No further questions. Richard called me to the stand next. I'd been dreading this part, but honestly, it was easier than I expected. He asked me to describe the incident in my own words, which I did. Then he asked me about my injuries. I dislocated my shoulder, cracked 2 ribs, and had a mild concussion. I couldn't work for 3 weeks, which cost me $3,576.92 in lost wages. My medical bills were $1,840 out of pocket. I also had to pay for transportation to and from the hospital, which was another $230. Total damages came to $5,646.92, not including the emotional toll of being sued for doing the right thing. Can you describe the emotional impact this lawsuit has had on you? I took a breath. I've lost weight. I can't sleep. I wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about losing everything I've worked for. I second-guess myself constantly. I keep thinking, what if I had just walked away? What if I had let someone else handle it? And then I hate myself for thinking that way, because a baby would be dead. If you could go back to that moment, knowing everything that came after, would you still catch the child? Yes. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Brett Hoffman tried to cross-examine me, but he didn't have much to work with. He asked if I'd considered the risk before catching the baby. No, I said. I didn't have time to consider the risk. I had about 3 seconds to decide whether to let a baby die or try to save him. I chose to try. But you knew there was a chance you'd fail. There was a bigger chance the baby would die if I did nothing. You're not a trained rescue professional. No, I'm just a guy who didn't want to watch a baby die. He didn't have a response to that. Richard called 2 more witnesses, Mrs. Chen, who testified about seeing the open balcony door before the incident, and one of the paramedics who'd responded to the scene. The paramedic, a woman named Linda Rodriguez, who'd been doing emergency response for 15 years, confirmed that my actions had likely saved the baby's life, and that the injuries, while serious, were an unavoidable consequence of the physics involved. In your professional opinion, Richard asked, did Mr. Miller act reasonably under the circumstances? Absolutely. He prevented a fatality. The child is alive because of him. Then Richard called his expert witness, Dr. Laura Finch, a biomechanics professor from UT Austin. She walked the court through the math. When an object falls from 50 feet, it reaches a velocity of approximately 35 miles per hour at impact. A 24-pound object traveling at that speed generates roughly 4,800 pounds of force. There is no human on Earth who could absorb that force without causing some degree of injury to the object being caught. Mr. Miller did everything he could under the circumstances. The alternative was certain death. Brett Hoffman tried to argue that I could have used a blanket or called for help first, but Dr. Finch shut him down. There wasn't time for a blanket. There wasn't time to call for help. The baby was falling. Mr. Miller reacted in the only way that made sense. He positioned himself to intercept the fall and absorb as much of the impact as possible. He succeeded. Judge Winters took notes the entire time. Closing arguments were brief. Brett Hoffman tried to paint me as reckless, but it was clear he knew he'd lost. Richard's closing was devastating. Your Honor, this lawsuit is an insult. Mr. Miller saved a child's life at great personal cost. physically, financially, and emotionally. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't ask for compensation. He simply did what any decent human being would do in that situation. And for that, he's been dragged into court and accused of negligence. This is not justice. This is opportunism. Ms. Martinez is exploiting a tragedy of her own making to extract money from the person who saved her child. I'm asking the court to dismiss this case with prejudice and award Mr. Miller damages for his suffering. Judge Winters didn't even take a recess. She looked at Nicole, then at me, then back at Nicole. I've heard enough, she said. Ms. Martinez, your lawsuit is without merit. Mr. Miller acted reasonably and heroically under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. The injuries to your son, while unfortunate, were an unavoidable consequence of the physics involved in preventing his death. You should be thanking him, not suing him. She turned to me. Mr. Miller, I apologize on behalf of this court for what you've been put through. This should never have gone this far. Then she turned back to Nicole. I hereby dismiss your lawsuit with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to issue a formal, written apology to Mr. Miller within 30 days. You will also pay him $30,000 in damages for emotional distress, lost wages, and legal fees. If you fail to comply, I will hold you in contempt. Do you understand? Nicole just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Court is adjourned. Update. 6 months later. So yeah, I won. Nicole sent me a half-hearted apology letter 3 weeks after the trial. 2 pages of, I was just trying to protect my son, and I hope you understand where I was coming from. I didn't respond. Richard handled the collection of the $30,000, which took about 4 months because Nicole tried to dodge it by claiming financial hardship. Eventually, the court garnished her wages at $847.15 per month until the debt was paid. I used the money to pay off my medical bills, cover my lost wages, replace my cracked phone screen, and sock the rest into savings. Richard waived most of his fees as a courtesy, which was incredibly generous of him. The whole thing ended up costing me about $2,200 in miscellaneous expenses, filing fees, document copies, that kind of thing, but getting $30,000 back more than covered it. Kyle and I went out for dinner to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries at this place we've been going to since high school. The burgers cost $12.50 each. Fries were $4.75, and we split a basket of onion rings for $7.95. Total bill came to $42.65, including tip. It felt good to finally close that chapter. Here's what I didn't expect. The media attention. Somehow, the story got picked up by a local news station, then a couple of national outlets. I did exactly one interview where I said basically what I've said here. I caught a baby, I got sued, and the system worked. People seemed to connect with it. I got a few hundred messages on social media, mostly supportive, though a handful of people still thought I should have done it differently. To those people, I say, go ahead and try catching a 24-pound object falling from 50 feet and see how it goes for you. The interview aired on a Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. By Wednesday morning, my phone was blowing up. People I hadn't talked to in years were reaching out. My mom called crying, saying she was proud of me. My boss, Frank, told me he'd gotten 3 new clients who specifically requested me because they saw the interview. One guy even left a review on our company website. Jason Miller is a hero. Hire him for all your HVAC needs. It was surreal. What really got me was the range of responses. Some people wanted to hire me specifically because of what happened. Others wanted to share their own stories about getting sued for helping someone. I got emails, direct messages, even a few handwritten letters mailed to my apartment. One woman told me her brother had saved someone from a car accident and got sued for improper first aid. A firefighter reached out to say he'd been through something similar. It was like I'd accidentally joined this club of people who got punished for doing the right thing. The weirdest part was the random acts of kindness. People started leaving gift cards at Frank's shop addressed to me. Coffee shop cards, restaurant cards, even a $50 card to an auto parts store. Total strangers wanting to help offset what I'd been through. Frank collected them all in an envelope. Ended up being about $340 worth. I tried to refuse them, but Frank insisted. These people want to do something, he said. Let them. I also got interview requests from podcasts, YouTube channels, and a couple of lawyers who wanted me to speak at seminars about Good Samaritan laws. I turned down most of them. I'm not trying to build a career out of this. Nicole, on the other hand, didn't fare so well. Her name got dragged through the mud online. People dug up her previous lawsuits and posted them everywhere. Someone even created a website cataloging all the details. Nothing illegal, just publicly available court records. And it ranked high on search results for her name. Her employer, some mid-level office job at a property management company, apparently let her go a few months after the court trial. According to what I heard, they cited budget cuts, but the timing was pretty convenient. Property management is all about reputation and trust, and having an employee who sued someone for saving a baby doesn't exactly inspire confidence in potential clients. I heard through the grapevine, Kyle knows someone who knows someone, that she's struggling financially and had to move in with her parents. The $30,000 judgment plus her legal fees, Brett Hoffman didn't work for free, apparently wiped out whatever savings she had. She's also having trouble finding new work because her name is permanently attached to this story online. Every time a potential employer searches her name, the lawsuit is the first thing that comes up. Her social media presence basically disappeared too. She deleted her Facebook, Instagram, everything. The comments people were leaving were brutal. That's the internet for you. Once the mob decides you're the villain, there's no coming back from it. The baby's father, who apparently wasn't in the picture during the incident and trial, tried to do some damage control afterward. He posted something on social media about how mistakes were made, and we're grateful for Mr. Miller's brave actions. Too little. Too late. In my opinion. He wasn't there when it mattered. Do I feel bad for her? Not really. She had every opportunity to just say thank you and move on with her life. Instead, she chose to sue me for $500,000 because her kid got hurt while I was saving his life. Actions have consequences. She learned that the hard way. As for me, I'm fine. My shoulder still aches when the weather changes, and I have a scar on the back of my head from where I hit the pavement. But otherwise, I'm good. I'm still fixing air conditioners, still living in my apartment, still hanging out with Kyle on weekends. Life goes on. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way.